So there is another dust storm that is just blowing across West Africa. And once again, it is not the dust of Harmattan, just around this period of the year, but it's that of dust following armoured vehicles that are rolling into a capital city. A dust that trails behind men in fatigues announcing on national television that they have seized power, so-called in the name of the people. That signals yet another democratic collapse in a region that not too long ago had promised itself that the dark styles of military rule were gone for good. This time the tragedy has struck in Guinea-Bissau, where soldiers have toppled the elected order, dissolved the institutions, detained political leaders, suspended the constitution, and installed themselves as the new authority, while ECOWAS, African Union, and neighbouring states, including Ghana, rushed to issue strongly worded statements that have become way too familiar, too ritualistic, and then empty, repeating the same lines about condemning the seizure of power and calling for a return to constitutional rule. My fellow Ghanaians, the fundamental question that confronts all of us and confronts this particular region is this: why do these coups keep happening? And why do they continue to receive significant public support in their early days in those countries? Even when citizens know perfectly well that soldiers ultimately do not bring prosperity, they do not expand freedom, they do not root out corruption, and certainly do not transform weak economies into strong ones. Why is it that at every turn in Mali, in Burkina Faso, in Guinea, in Niger, and now in Guinea-Bissau, the people are pouring onto the street to celebrate the arrival of military rule, only to discover later that the promised salvation is nothing but another version of the same suffering, repackaged in camouflage and delivered with harsher hands? The truth is uncomfortable sometimes, but it stares us in the face. Coups do not emerge from nowhere. They grow out of political rot, the corruption, the arrogance, the misrule and sheer contempt for citizens that have become the defining characteristics of many governments in the region. And because we have normalized a brand of democracy where elections happen, but accountability do not, where constitutions exist but are routinely disrespected, where leaders come to power with promises and leave office with wealth, and because state institutions are so weak and so compromised that the people, in their despair, now look to anyone who claims they can bring change, even if that person comes with a gun across his chest and a beret on his head. Fellow Ghanaians, it is always revealing that the moment a coup occurs, the entire diplomatic universe then springs into action. Righteous action, I should say. ECOWAS condemns, the AU condemns, the UN condemns, and individual countries pretend to be shocked and outraged, yet these same bodies remain disturbingly mute when the warning signs are glaring, when leaders manipulate constitutions to extend their rule, when elections are rigged in broad daylight, when state funds are looted without consequence, when journalists are harassed, opponents are intimidated, and institutions become personal fiefdoms of ruling elite. If you refuse to speak when democracy is being suffocated, do not pretend to be shocked when it dies eventually. Guinea's Colonel Dembuya arrived promising a transition to civilian rule, only to entrench himself. Burkina Faso's Captain Traoré promised a quick return to constitutional order, only to tighten his grasp on power. And Niger's Janta said it was only, quote, saving the republic, only to prolong its rule indefinitely. And now Guinea-Bissau has fallen into the same pattern. What this tells all of us, painfully, undeniably, is that democracy in West Africa has failed to deliver the basic dividends of dignity, justice, opportunity, and accountability. And until this changes, until ordinary people can point to something tangible and say, this democracy is working for me, the region will continue to oscillate between sham democracies and opportunistic juntas, because corrupt parliaments and self-righteous soldiers, and between constitutional stagnation and constitutional adventurism. Fellow Ghanaians, what is even more tragic in all of this is how predictably performative the regional response has become. When Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger fell to coups, ECOWAS threatened war, they threatened sanctions, they threatened isolation, and threatened military intervention, all of which backfired spectacularly because the junta leaders simply called their bluff and then walked away. And their citizens, already disillusioned by years of misgovernance, embraced the juntas as lesser of two evils. The loud declarations of ECOWAS meant nothing because the moral authority of ECOWAS has been hollowed out by years of selective silence and political hypocrisy. When leaders manipulate constitutions to run for third and fourth terms, like Alassane Ouattara in ECOWAS, in Côte d'Ivoire, I should say, ECOWAS is silent. When elections are brazenly rigged, ECOWAS is silent. When corruption reaches biblical proportions, ECOWAS is silent. When state violence is unleashed, ECOWAS is again silent. But when the military strikes, after years of public frustration, have reached boiling point, then suddenly ECOWAS remembers its principles. This approach is not leadership, it's abdication. That is just masked as diplomacy. We must also be honest with ourselves. If citizens cannot see a meaningful difference between life under a civilian government and life under a junta, then democracy is already dead. Because democracy is not merely the act of voting. It is the experience of fairness, the experience of justice, the experience of dignity, the experience of having a voice and seeing that voice reflected in public policy. If democracy does not put food on people's tables, if it does not protect their freedoms, if it does not punish the corrupt and reward the honest, and if it does not make their lives safer, fairer, and more secure, then the people will eventually ask, what is the point of all of this, and why should I care? But when people stop caring, then coups become easier. Fellow Ghanaians, this is why West Africa must fundamentally rethink leadership, and of course the entirety of the continent. Not in speeches, but in diplomatic gatherings, not in slogans, but in practice. Our democracies cannot survive on rituals alone. They must deliver. A continent cannot continue pretending that corruption is a small issue of mismanagement or is a mere political rivalry. People are suffering deeply. And when suffering meets silence, then desperation meets opportunity. And that is where the soldiers will strike. The saddest reality in all of this is that the soldiers who take over almost always betray the very people who welcome them, repeating the same abuses, the same corruption, the same disregard for the law. Because the problem was never just the elected leaders. It is the problem of the architecture of governance itself, built on weak institutions and political culture that worships power but despises accountability. So fellow Ghanaians, the answer is not and will never be military rule. But the answer also cannot be the kind of democracy that gives everything to the political class and nothing to the people. West Africa must deliver justice. It must build strong institutions. It must punish corruption decisively. It must respect term limits. It must create opportunities for youth. It must build economies that are not eternally dependent on foreign rescue. They have gone to the IMF 17 times, and I mean Ghana. That alone is a national obituary for leadership. We must fix leadership on this continent, or the coups will continue. Our leaders must stop behaving as though the people owe them loyalty, rather than they owing the people governance. They must stop acting as though power is a birthright. It's not a privilege. It is one that must be held in trust. Our leaders must stop treating the state as a personal estate, where contracts are rewards and public office is an inheritance. Because when the people rise, they do not rise in vacuum. They rise against the failures of those who should have listened when listening still mattered. Fellow Ghanaians, we have to be clear. We do not support coups. I do not. I reject coups. I condemn coups. But we condemn again with equal force the political arrogance, corruption, misrule, and constitutional vandalism that creates the fertile grounds for coups to flourish. Both must be rejected. Both must be confronted. And all of that must end. If democracy is to endure in Africa, it must be useful to the people who live under it. Because the people will seek anything, even the worst option, simply because they have run out of hope. And when hope dies, it does not die quietly. Good morning, fellow Ghanaians. And hopefully, we do not get the same story in this country.